and what happens at the end of it is something that needs to be addressed by governments, even as they consider off-grid technologies and standalone solar in particular as a part of the electrification and the energy mix. So in coming up with the strategies and the economic and the plans for the sector, it is critical to also take into consideration what happens to the equipment when it reaches the end of its lifespan. So I will not go into too much detail. The purpose of today's webinar is to look at the examples from Nigeria and Rwanda. And as a program, we continue to provide information and resources around the off-grid sector and standalone solar in particular, so that as policies and decisions and around policies and regulations are made, that these can be well-founded in research and knowledge that allows for this to be taken forward in a way that is sustainable for the sector. So I thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and I want to hand it back to Esther and over to the team, and I hope we will have good deliberations and good action points coming out of this webinar this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pauline, for the brief and informative introduction to this webinar. And just so that all of us are aware who ESTAF is, I'm going to invite Colin, who will start us off with our presentation on some of the findings that are coming from Rwanda. We'll also have some highlights from Nigeria, then we'll proceed to the next session. So welcome, Colin.
Thanks, Esther. I hope you can all see me and hear me as well. Okay, so...
Yes, we can hear you, Colin.
Much of our session today is going to be a panel discussion. But to set the tone of the discussion, we will have a presentation on the work we did in Rwanda and also Nigeria as regards to e-waste, to set the tone of the discussion. Go straight to slide 3, please. So, as I said, we'll share our findings of the work we did in Rwanda on e-waste. So just like any other country, Rwanda has seen a growing volume of generation of e-waste, discarded computers and electrical material as well as electronics. So globally, for the last decade, there has been 38% growth of e-waste, and unfortunately only 20% of which was able to be recycled. So as I said, Rwanda is following this global trend as well. Why? Because also they have got a strategy to electrify the country through off solar, but also since 2008, they've been having, this project on 1 laptop per child, which has also increased the generation of e-waste into the environment. So to address that, in 2008, they started a process of developing an e-waste policy. So the first draft was completed in 2015, and then thereafter, this e-waste policy was incorporated into a bigger sanitation policy in 2016. And then 2 years later, they created legal instrument and legislation in terms of, e-waste regulation in 2018. So yeah, so you would see in that case, they have that, the framework for the policy and regulatory, yeah. But in addition to the policy and the regulations, the government of Rwanda also, established an e-waste facility in collaboration with the private sector. There is a company called Enviroserve Rwanda that operates and manages this recycling facility in the eastern part of the country, about 92 kilometers from Kigali. Second slide. So because of this STAF as a program, initially we want to learn from Rwanda, from their policy and regulatory framework, but also from this partnership they had with the private sector on managing e-waste. But later on, after the consultation with the government of Rwanda, they also said we should also assess the challenges that they have been facing on practicing or addressing e-waste in the country. So we developed like a knowledge management product, as I said. What we did was like, first of all, we did a desktop review to appreciate the previous work that was done. In fact, in Rwanda, DFID did 2 case studies before us on the same subject. But also, in addition to the desktop study, we also consulted various stakeholders who were involved in e-waste. Following slide, please. So, looking at the e-waste landscape in Rwanda in terms of the infrastructure. So, as I said, they did establish a recycling plant in 2018. And this recycling plant was, is being operated by the private sector company, but also it's being owned by the government in a revenue share model. But in addition to the recycling plant, there are about 19 collection points that are supposed to, to gather the e-waste and send it to the recycle plants. They're being spread all over the country. Of course, the target was to have 30 collection centers in each of the districts of Rwanda, but so far there are only 19. But as I said, this infrastructure is being managed in a public-private partnership. The whole cycle started with a MINICOM, the Minister of Trade and Industry in Rwanda, which is responsible for the private sector. And they started this negotiation of having the recycling plant that, as I said, was established in 2018. So the role of the Enviroserve as a private sector operator is to run the plant. And the idea of PPP was like the government wants to tap into the expertise of the private sector as far as e-waste is concerned in terms of the technology. Next slide, please. So in this study, as I said, we also did assess the challenges. So despite of the awareness campaign that the government of Rwanda has been doing with the Enviroserve, the private sector operator, still there are problems around awareness. There is still a work to be done on the awareness. One is because still the public, most of the public does not know where to send the product and how to send it. So that's a big problem. But also there is that problem of emotional attachment to the product. So still the public wants to remain with the product even when it reaches the end of its life. But also there is an issue of the ignorance. The public is ignorant of the fact that the product, when it reaches the end of its life, can have hazardous consequences to their health and to the environment. They don't know that. So that's still a problem. But when you also look at the regulatory framework, we've said that they have got a very good, they have policy and they have got the regulation, but still there are problems. In this study, we discovered 3 problems that are still prevalent in Rwanda. One, solar lights and solar batteries are still being grouped into a broader group of, lights and batteries in laws and regulations of the EU-West. And therefore, sometimes there's a confusion whether the solar lights and the solar batteries are really included in the regulatory framework. But also the other problem we have seen is the private sectors, meaning the solar companies, are not being, forced, or there is no law that forces them to have environmental and social management plan that would see them comply with the EU management practice and take back the products for the recycling. But the other problem that we've seen in Rwanda, which is I think is good to hear, is we have come also to find out that there are so many government agencies involved in the EU space, at least 7, agencies. So you have the MINICOM, the Ministry of Industry and Trade, that started the initiative of building a recycling plant. Then you have the Ministry of ICT and Youth, that is responsible, that I think went on to, to push for the development of the policy and the regulations. But still, you have the Ministry of Environment, you have the rural, what we call as the Rwanda Environment and Management Authority. You still have the Ministry of Local Government. So all these cast a doubt, or we have found that it is becoming increasingly difficult to coordinate different players into the space, and sometimes there is even a risk of overlapping of the activities. So that's a problem. But the other problem, we have found that yes, they've got a plant to recycle, but still it's operating below capacity. Yes, one, it can be blamed because of low awareness, so there is not much that is being sent to the plant. But the other problem is they still do not have a dedicated line to treat lithium batteries. And just for your information, the lithium batteries of the solar products are the most hazardous materials, and they cannot be recycled. So that's a problem. Next. In terms of our recommendation from this study, we said, one, I think there's a need of joint work between the government and the private sector to engage the community, of course, to increase awareness, to take back the product, but also to enforce. So that's I think we saw that should be done. But the other issue, that's obviously, is the government now should go ahead and enforce the private sector, meaning in this case the solar companies, to have the environment and management plans in place so that they can comply with the EU management practices. As for the private sector itself, we do recommend that they should keep proper records of the inventory in terms of what they've sold, and in terms of at what time do they reach their end life, because that also will allow them to make good plans for e-waste management. At the end of the day, even though the concept of e-waste requires many stakeholders, the government, the private sector, and end users, but still the private sectors as manufacturer have got a very big role to play because they are the one who did manufacture the product. And even the legislation around e-waste, they have this concept of extended producer responsibility to see to it that the companies not only manufacture, but also they've got responsibility to take care of the e-waste. Yeah, and then the other issue is about the e-waste itself. I mean, the recycling of the e-waste itself is expensive. So the issue is the solar companies should also find a way of repairing and refurbish their materials before they decide to go to do recycling. As for the recycles, obviously we would say, because we have got interested in standalone solar sector, I think it doesn't make any sense if you can recycle and you cannot recycle batteries. So I think all the recycling plants, I think they should have a line for recycling of the batteries. But another issue, we think also the government should not only apply the stick, but also should apply the carrot, in the sense that they could have incentives to to motivate the companies to have the e-waste management, for example, environmental management plans. For example, you could have that, for example, in Rwanda, where the government provides, the banks, which is being managed by the government, provides grants and subsidies, that these private sector companies should not be able to get these incentives and the grants unless they have environmental management plans in place. So that will motivate them. So these are our recommendations. And then we finish up with the next slide. So the next slide is, we also learn about the best practice in Rwanda. I think I've spoken about the public-private partnership. It's good. It's good for other countries also to emulate that. Why? It's because it allows the government to do what it can do best, and allow the private sector that have got expertise in e-waste to be used. The second thing is about the coordination and inclusion. I've said about that. Everybody should be involved. It's not, e-waste is not an agenda for the government, or it's not an agenda for solar companies. It's an agenda for everybody, including the end users. So that's we saw it in Rwanda, and I think it's a best practice that should be adopted as well. Again, before doing anything, when you want to develop an e-waste ecosystem, I think it's very paramount to have baseline data in the first place, to understand the usage of, in this case, standalone solar, but also how much waste is being generated, so that you can plan in place the collection centers. And if you, for example, want to have the recycling, you know how much e-waste is being produced into the environment. And of course, there is an issue of communication. We learned it in Rwanda as well. So they've got, even though with the low awareness, but they do a lot of awareness campaign. And one of the things that has been very successful is the social media. So we also think this is something that other countries can replicate too, that when you are doing the communication, you use various methods, including the social media, which is very popular nowadays. Last slide. Yeah, so I think I am done. But the issue here is, we should all from this study, we have come to realize that e-waste is not only a problem, but it's also an opportunity. It's also a resource. In Rwanda, for example, the management of e-waste has been, has enabled or has created jobs. Yeah, those who are involved in the collection of the garbage, those who are involved in recycling at the plant. But also we have seen that e-waste as well has been able to make sure, e-waste management has been able to facilitate the reuse of the waste. So for example, as I said, before materials are being recycled at the plant, they are usually being repaired and refurbished. So for example, the Enviroserve have been selling around 4,000 refurbished computers to the community. So that's also a good problem. It's not only a problem, but it's also a resource. Thanks. So probably maybe we should continue with Nigeria. Chibu or Queen, who is doing the presentation? Yes, Queen, please continue.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Queen Agomo, Assistant Country Manager for A-Staff Nigeria. So speaking to the A-Staff work in Nigeria, prior to embarking on the e-waste study, we observed that on the private sector side, there was poor awareness of e-waste regulations and its management and disposal practices. Also on the government side, we also observed that there's limited understanding of the e-waste sector and the understanding of the OGS sector and the e-waste stream that comes out of it. So furthermore, the OGS sector, which is the off-grid solar sector, is developing at a steady rate, and it's estimated to generate about 3,000 metric tons of e-waste of solar e-waste by 2025. Therefore, we collaborated with the National Environmental Standards and Regulation Enforcement Agency and the Ministry of Environment to provide support on managing e-waste for the SAS sector in line with the National E-Waste Regulatory Framework, as well as to ensure that this document serves as a go-to, a standard e-waste reference document for the sector. We focused on three main areas during the study, and we focused on legislation, regulatory framework, sector experience, guidance, and recommendation. Next, please. So with regards to the findings, we observed that there are several legislation in Nigeria on this topic that's in existence. So like you can see the 4 national legislation on e-waste management, on waste management. There's 4 national legislation on e-waste. There are 2 national legislations on battery waste, as well as 3 international conventions on hazardous waste. There are also other ongoing initiatives and projects supporting the sector, such as the GEF, that's the Global Environment Facility, and the Global LEAP Awards, which Nigeria is a beneficiary. There are also other self-regulation activities that Industry Association.
Then I pick the middle.
Sorry. And the producer responsibility organizations. With regards to the sector practice, the key finding there is that we saw that there are few licensed e-waste recyclers, as well as a high number of informal battery recyclers. As you agree with me, there's room for improvement on both the private and the sector side. Please, next slide. And so on this slide, which is our last slide, talks about the recommendation. So we provided recommendations for both the private and the public sector, particularly for the solar companies. We suggest that there be a development of a standard operating procedure for SAS in line with the regulatory requirements, as well as an industry-led initiative to be created which improves take-back, collections, and treatment, and also to develop a more efficient and cost-effective framework, which can also be formalized as a PRO. So with the Producer Responsibility Organization, we suggest that this be achieved through a collaboration of the EPRON, the Battery Alliance, as well as the Industry Association here in Nigeria, or if there are any other third parties, that is welcome to come together to synergize and provide the adequate support that the sector requires. For the government side, we recommend that there's a need for a multi-stakeholder coordination mechanism on e-waste for the sector, primarily through the Rural Electrification Agency of Nigeria, as well as NESREA, the Environmental Regulations Agency. We also suggest for a policy and regulatory coordination for the sector, which we have recommended and has been adopted by the NESREA. Lastly, we recommend that the government provide incentives and technical support to attract private sector investments. So we also know that the REA is a very active player in the off-grid solar sector in Nigeria and has played a key role in ensuring effective e-waste management of off-grid solar across its programs and projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Queen. Thanks for a good and insightful presentation. So as I said from the beginning, these 2 presentations were like setting a tone for a more insightful discussion on the subject. So without wasting time, I wish to do a round of, we'll do a round of introduction of our key speakers today from Nigeria, from Tanzania, but also from Rwanda. So each of you, I think, my dear speaker, 2 minutes each for you, your name, your position or role, the organization you represent, and a bit of your exposure on E-Waste. 2 minutes each, please. Maybe let's start with Charles.
Yes, please.
Yes,
can you hear me?
We can hear you, Charles. Proceed, 2 minutes.
Yeah, my name is Charles Mugabo. I'm an environmental scientist, and I have worked. I'm an environmental scientist, and I'm a consultant based here in Rwanda. I have worked on several assignments on E-Waste, including this one. So I'm on this in this forum and on this panel as someone who contributed on this study for Rwanda, where we assess the practices and the challenges in implementation of solar E-Waste, but also and sustainable management of E-Waste, the off-grid sector for Rwanda. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Professor, please proceed.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Professor Oko. I am the environmental specialist for the Nigeria Electrification Project, which is the Nigeria Electrification Project is a World Bank assisted project, that is being implemented by the Rural Electrification Agency. Obviously, we are, into the off-grid sector, where obviously there's a lot of e-waste, that will be generated, as we move along. So herein, my interest or our interest is actually to ensure environmental sustainability as we implement the project. So I'm here in this panel today to at least share, some of the experiences we've gathered so far during the course of the implementation of the Nigerian Electrification Project. As you might know, the Nigerian Electrification Project is a project, that it has 3 components. That is the energizing education, program, and the solar hybrid mini grid, and then the solar home systems. So a lot of this, all of these programs, it obviously has as a fallout the some of these e-waste that is being discussed here today. So hopefully we'll be in a position to at least share some of our experiences so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Chibu.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chibuike Mabebu. I'm the country manager for the A-Staff program in Nigeria, and I will just be contributing on the panel to share more insights on the work that we carried out in collaboration with the government and private sector, as well summarized by my colleague, Quinn. Thank you.
Thanks, Chibu. And finally, Grayson.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Grayson Metili. I'm the head of Africa operations from NG Energy Access. NG Energy Access is a combination of 3 companies, a combination that happened last year, put together Mobisol, Phoenix International, and Power Corner in Tanzania. So with this combination, we're now able to provide a full range of products, from introductory products to SHS category to mini grids. So yeah, I've been in the OGS sector for about 7 years, and I'm looking forward to contribute more here. Thanks.
Good. Thanks for introduction. And I think now let's move on. So my first question would be straight to Professor Oko. So, so in addition to this desire to attain Sustainable Development Goal number 12, which is basically to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns, and having this environmental gain, what do you think is the business rationale for e-waste management, Professor Oko?
Yeah, thank you so much, for asking that question. And also, let me once again say thank you for this, for organizing this webinar. Well, truth be told, I mean, I attempt to answer that question. I mean, one have to look at it from two perspectives. That is, from the economic perspective, the environmental and human, health perspective. But if you take it from the economic perspective, for instance, you will agree with me that the e-waste, as a sector, has a lot of potential. Bearing in mind that, there have been a lot of estimates, even in the literature, that suggest that by the year 2020, 2030, financial benefits that may accrue from e-waste recycling product will amount to almost about $15 billion US. This is quite a huge sum of money, you will agree with me. So in a way, to ensure that different countries within the African continent tap into this green economy, that is obviously propelling what you might refer to as, circular economy. Of course, the idea of having e-waste, management is very, very crucial, because at the end of the day, not having, such, waste management, plan, that would ensure that all of these, waste that are being generated are, managed effectively, for the good of the country and for the benefit of humankind. And of course, we'll be losing out of this whole process. Now, if we take into consideration, for instance, let's say, for example, in Nigeria, it is, is well known that for now, most of the people that are involved in the recycling business in Nigeria, almost 80% of people involved in the e-waste management, they are those you might refer to as those involved in the informal sector. And of course, the antecedent fallout of that is that, there is leakage. That is, both economic leakage, to the, government coffers. So in a way, economically, it is the duty of the government to ensure that obviously there has to be a concerted effort, to ensure that these leakages are blocked by making available recycling plants, that these people at the informal sector, can key into by way of providing materials, that will lead for upscaling. And then beside that, like I said previously, if you look at the human and the health consequences of not recycling, it's a major issue, because obviously we know very well, or it's known that some of these waste materials that are being discussed here today, they are materials that obviously will lead to some health consequences. And as a result, the good aspect is that developing a robust waste management plan would actually help to mitigate exposures for human and the environment. As a result, the consequences of the fallout, that is the in terms of human diseases and all that, they will be mitigated. And of course, we must bear in mind also that this whole process of recycling are being actually being driven by the principles of the 5 R's. That is, the reuse, reduce, repair, recycle, and recover. And of course, if we look at it from that perspective, then you also bear with or agree with me that this recycling itself will provide materials for production. So if it does provide materials for production, it will mean that in a way, we are, we'll be in a position to at least reduce, over dependence on our natural resources. And in a way will again mitigate environmental degradation and of course, the almighty climate change consequences. I think with that said, I yield to you, moderator, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Oko. So that has been very, very insightful. There's a background noise coming. Yeah, now I think it's okay. So yeah, so from Professor Oko, he said about, in addition to environmental gains and preserving the health of human beings, e-waste management is all about, providing material for production in that concept of repair, reuse, and recovery. Okay, so thanks for that. Let me now go to our second speaker. That's Grayson. Grayson, we have heard the story from Rwanda here that they are a bit ahead of the pile in terms of regulatory framework and also because of the recycling plant they have. From your experience and exposure, what can you say about the latest development on e-waste for the rest of the region? Please, Grayson.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. I think apart from countries taking action and enacting their waste management policies, we see other countries like Tanzania, for example, following suit, where in 2018 they also signed their policy and also which is part of the Environment Management Act of 2004. The enforcement, of course, is another topic that has to be, sort of discovered. But we see that the East African nations, as well as other parts of Africa, taking more action, setting up such collaborative efforts to kind of curb the e-waste challenge. So it's sort of shifting the dynamics as well, from only looking at enforcement of the policies and the regulations to also looking at involvement. And so we see, for example, the general outlook of the industry shifting from only recycling or waste management to actually circularity. So looking at circularity, you're looking at everything from reducing, reusing, recycling, and then also recovering. And with reducing, you're looking at everything from the beginning of the value chain, which is from the design of the product to reduce waste, up to the end of life management, which is the recycling. And on top of that, we've also seen institutions, worldwide institutions like the World Bank, setting up the Global Battery Alliance. And this is an alliance that was formed to allow members from the private sector as well as the government institutions to come together to figure out creative solutions on how to manage waste. And especially the waste that comes from the batteries, because it is very hazardous. And then we see also recyclers sort of paying attention to the off-grid sector as well, to try and bring more attention to the waste that is generated from this sector, and even partnering up with the sector. For instance, through GOGLA, which is the industry association for the off-grid solar sector, recently, in Nairobi, a collective was signed, which was named the Kenya Solar Waste Collective, where 7 companies came together and decided to actually take action on waste management And part of the action being taken here is that we collect waste from any brand, regardless of which company put it in the market. So we collect each other's waste. We put it, we pull it back into the waste management streams, and we partner with organizations or recyclers like the We Center and Enviroserve to also recycle this waste. And this is very soon going to develop into a fully fledged producer responsibility organization, or PRO. And the process for this is on the way, starting like in July. So in general, we see that the awareness on waste management is improving in the sector and within the nations of East Africa, and action is starting to forge into place.
Thanks, Grayson. That's very good. Good to hear this shift you have been talking about from enforcement to involvement, and talking about manufacturers being able to, from day one, to design products which at the end of the day will not produce much waste. And also it's very exciting to hear about now even the private sector is thinking about taking back other people's, other companies' products. That's good to hear as well. Let's move to Charles. Charles, you have been involved in this study in Rwanda. So pretty much you know reasonably the landscape there. My question to you is around this policy and regulatory framework we've been talking about in Rwanda. What, in your opinion, what are in your findings, what could you say are the key elements or the key principles or the key content of this policy and the regulatory framework of Rwanda that maybe other countries can emulate?
Thanks, Colin. Thank you for inviting me on this panel. What I can say, first of all, is that all of these waste management initiatives have a strong and clear base, which is a global base, like a national base, whereby the government of Rwanda decided to follow a green and a green growth and climate resilience agenda from the year 2012. So from that year, different initiatives, different policy settings, different regulatory settings, different legislation settings have been developed and adopted in general in regard to the sustainability agenda of the Rwandan economy. Then from that background, there have been policies, laws, and regulations that have been developed in terms of environmental sustainability, in terms of pollution control, where the e-waste management agenda falls. In that regard, from your question, we have different policies and regulations specifically on e-waste management, and in the same regard, I would say that we have 4 different clusters in terms of e-waste management regulatory framework, whereby we have first of all, we have two key umbrella policies, which are the National Sanitation Policy and the National Environment and Climate Change Policy. I would say that those are the key driving policy documents that actually inform the e-waste management agenda. And I would say that the first one, the National Sanitation Policy, is the most key, because in Rwanda, e-waste management is considered as a sanitation component because it falls under solid waste management in the subcategory of hazardous waste, on the same level as medical waste, and radioactive waste. So it is categorized as a hazardous waste. So that's why it's the umbrella policy for its management is the sanitation policy, which was adopted in 2016 together with its implementation strategy. Actually, the policy talks about provide guidance in general for all sanitation matters, including household sanitation, individual sanitation, and the sanitation in the urban planning settings, and the same policy highlights specifically, provide the guidance specifically on the e-waste and on the e-waste, whereby under its objective number 6 talks about establishment of an e-waste collection and management framework to ensure safe management of e-waste. Then from there, that's actually it's under that objective that the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure to manage waste have been developed. I'm talking about the e-waste dismantling facility in the eastern province of the country. Then on the other hand, actually to support the same umbrella policy in terms of e-waste management, we have the National Environment and Climate Change Policy, which normally deals with all matters related to environment and climate change. So it has different policy objectives, under which we have several policy statements, under which we have several policy actions actually to guide on different environment and climate change matters. So in that regard, specifically the policy objective number 5 on improving environmental well-being of Rwandans, we have a specific policy statement talking about prevention and promotion of integrated pollution control, whereby you have very specific policy action on e-waste, which is the policy action number 13, saying that technology development and innovation should be supported. Technology development and innovation in e-waste management. So this policy action under the National Environment and Climate Change Policy is very specific, and it at the same time support the policy, the objective number 6 of the National Sanitation Policy. So altogether, the two policies, the one on sanitation and the other one on environment and climate change, get together to provide clear guidance in terms of in terms of waste management in general. So then from that policy guidance, I would say that the policy and the legislation landscape for e-waste management in Rwanda has also other tools which are legally binding, whereby we have the ministerial guidelines, which come as the implementation tools of the above mentioned policies. The ministerial guidelines related on importation of used electrical and electronic equipment. I would say that it comes as a prevention measure because it provides it prohibits the importation of used electric and electronic equipment, actually in order to prevent big flows of e-waste in the national waste stream, which would be harmful to the people's life. But at the same time, it provides guidance for when those materials are to be imported, but it says they should never be imported when they are for commercial purposes, for trade purposes. Only they can initiatives like or other charity NGOs. So legally, again, you have the environmental law is a legal tool providing guidance on how to handle hazardous and toxic waste, e-waste included. In the law, they are sanctions for in case the waste is not handled by authorized people who knows best practices in terms of handling e-waste. In the same framework of legally binding instrument, we have also the e-waste management standards, regulations, and the guidelines, whereby you have a regulation that were established by the Rwanda Utility and Regulatory Authority, known as RURA, which provide clear guidance in terms of getting licenses, who and why X company should get a license to handle e-waste. So it provides the clear guidance whereby no one is allowed to go into the e-waste management business if they don't have such license. And the license requirements are very strict, whereby there is a list of equipment, there is a list of staff, there is a list of key skills that people should have in order to be able to handle the e-waste that has been collected. We also have another key instrument, which is the e-waste management standard, providing what will be the minimum standard for quality electronic and electrical product. Actually, that should the minimum quality requirement for those products that should enter the Rwandan market in order to avoid substandard product that would enter the country. The same in the same batch of standard, we have the standard on e-waste management, which provide clear guidance, best practices guidance in terms of waste handling, including collection, transport, and disposal. Finally, in the legal and the legislation framework, we have the ministerial guidelines providing minimum requirements, minimum standards for the solar home system. I would say that actually this is the only instrument that I would say we have on solar, also solar product. And as the moderator said, this is one of the key gaps that the Rwandan regulatory policy, regulatory and legislation framework has in terms of management of e-waste from solar. So then we finally we have the international conventions that we have ratified and signed, which are the Basel Convention and the Bamako Convention. So far, those are the two we have, and but they also cover a good part of hazardous waste, e-waste included. Yeah, so so that's what I would say that that is followed that the instrument that we actually have now in Rwanda. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, that has been very, very detailed, so to say. So now we know that in Rwanda, there is no such thing as a standalone e-waste policy. The e-waste policy is embodied in the sanitation policy, and also is being guided by the environmental policy and climate change policy as well. But we also know that for the ecosystem to work, it's a combination of policy and legal instrument as well, which also go as far as including the international conventions as well. And at the heart of all that is the physical infrastructure that the Rwandan government has. So thanks, Charles. I think now let's move fast. Please feel free to write your comments, your queries, your questions into the chat box, because I only see one question here. Because after this session, we want to go back to you and respond to you what you have to say, please. So please feel free to write in the chat box. So now to you, Chibu. So we've been hearing about the involvement of the private sector, the end users, but now maybe from your Nigerian experience, how crucial is effective government involvement in the successful e-waste ecosystem?
Thanks, Colin. I would just say very, very crucial. As I was listening to Mr. Charles, there are a lot of, all the legislation that he kept mentioning as well. And even when my colleague Quinn presented all the several legislation and policy and regulatory documents that are in country, it can be confusing a lot for the private sector, both for the solar companies in terms of how to comply with these regulations, and even investors or, the private sector who are looking to set up e-waste recycling plants. But in general, I'll say the role of government is very crucial. And when Prof was speaking earlier, he mentioned, two different perspectives for e-waste. So there's the economic perspective, and then there's the environmental and safety and the health benefit. And the later part is where the government has to focus on, or where each issue is crucial. In implementing off-grid solar projects, you have to have a circular approach. And so beyond looking at the benefits, so in the case of Nigeria, we have several wonderful initiatives that the REA is implementing. You have the NEP project that Prof had mentioned that has deployed several mini-grids and over 300,000 solar home systems. You have a program that is looking to deploy 5 million solar connections by 2023. And these are huge laudable projects that benefit and improve electricity access. But then also on the flip side, you're also looking at the amount of e-waste that will be generated as well. And with the off-grid solar sector, it's a bit peculiar, it's different. So unlike other electronics, maybe like your smartphones that can be considered luxury items, the standalone solar, the off-grid solar sector, the focus really is aimed at improving electrification for the rural communities as well. So most companies who are involved in the sector are actually, making efforts to reach these last mile communities to deploy these solutions and electrify them. So there is also that additional constraint that comes with having to go back to now collect the e-waste, especially since most of these areas are hard to reach. So in this is where the government has to play a significant role. The first one really is trying to improve or clarifying the regulatory process for e-waste management for the standalone sector, which is a new and asset-growing sector. There is also the responsibility of accountability for the private sector as well. Even though like Grayson had mentioned, there are some solar companies who are coming together to actually promote sustainable practices for e-waste. And even in the case of Nigeria, you have the Renewable Energy Association that has actually developed a policy for useless acid batteries to regulate. But beyond that, there's also the need for the government broadly to promote accountability as well, just to ensure that even though we're, the off-grid solar sector is really doing a great job by electrifying and improving the socioeconomic lives, but also we are not creating a whole new issue with the rising e-waste stream, especially with batteries. At the same time, the government also has to play a role ensuring that this does not overburden the sector and then add additional constraint for companies that are looking to actually help implement the government's electrification mandate as well. And so, from drawing from what everyone has said, I'll just, summarize it in a few areas. The role is crucial, first of all, in the area of the regulatory aspect, just clarifying it and making it easy for solar companies to comply, and also providing incentives that would encourage companies to actually reach out to the last mile and collect back or, adopt sustainable practices. And also even looking at the economic side, trying to bring in private sector investments to set up more recycling centers, like you shared in the case in Rwanda, and also with regards to just even sensitizing the public, on the on e-waste practices, in terms of returning used end of life off-grid solar products, and supporting the establishment of collection centers. So basically, you can't, even though the private sector has made some effort in the sector trying to self-regulate and promote best practices, it's really up to the government to lead in terms of improving the environment and encouraging effective e-waste management, basically. I'll stop there, Colin.
Thanks, Chip. It's very good to hear that. So having legislation and policy is one thing, but still the government has got a work to do in terms of clarifying the regulatory process itself, promote accountability of the private sector. The government can provide carrot and stick, can provide incentives as well to motivate the private sector to be accountable. But then again, there's an issue of full sensitizing. We've all heard about awareness, so sensitizing the public to embrace the practice. Thanks, Chibu. That has been very, very good. I think in the interest of time, let's maybe have one more question from the panel, from the key speakers, and then maybe we go back to the audience. But again, we still have only one question on the chat, in the chat box. Please throw in your questions so that this this session should be more of a dialogue, two-way traffic. Maybe let's hear again from Professor Oko. So there's been a mentioning of extended producer responsibility from various people who have spoken, including myself. So can you please try to give us an insight? How best can we operationalize this EPR, extended producer responsibility, for a successful UST ecosystem? Professor Oko.
Yeah, moderator, thanks a lot for that question.
Yeah.
Well, of course, in attempting to answer that question, I will situate it within the Nigeria context, i.e., what is operational so far, and what, just like the man from Rwanda just stated earlier, there are a lot of, protocols and international treaties that have been entered by different governments, including Nigeria, on against transboundary movement of e-waste and chemicals generally. But having said that, I think it is very important for one to understand that, for example, in Nigeria, the primary institutions responsible for environmental management is the Federal Republic of Nigeria is the Federal Ministry of Environment. And within the context of the Federal Ministry of Environment, you have some other agencies, including NESREA, which was earlier referred to as, by Chibukem and Queen, whilst they were giving their own, presentation. Now, the NESREA, that is the Nigerian, Environmental Standard Regulatory Enforcement Agency, is actually the police arm of the Federal Ministry of Environment. And, within that context, theirs is actually, supposed to police and implement or enforce, all these laws that are operational within the environmental sector, for which EPR Act is part of, those policies. Now, before the EPR, there have been some other laws that have been operational within, and it is in Nigeria within the context of environmental management, such like the Environmental Sanitation and Waste Management Act of 2009. And then some other laws, including the automobile and the manufacturing accessory sector. These are laws that came into effect, way back before the EPR. The EPR in Nigeria at least came into effect 2016. And now, the truth here is that EPR is a very good policy document. And then, to discuss, how, for instance, government institutions can afford to implement EPR, I think it would be very important for me to situate it within the context of what the Nigerian Electrification Project is doing. Now, within the context of the Nigerian Electrification Project, for which the REA is the implementing agency, with the enablement of the MD and his management team, we have been able to at least incorporate these EPR policies and instruments such a way and manner that moving forward, it will render, at least we give the government, some level of ownership and accountability, so that in terms of managing waste, they will be in a position to know, for instance, what will be the amount of quantity of, for example, battery that will come into the country within a specific number of years. And of course, it will give them room to at least hold each, for example, the mini-grid developers or EPC contractors within the EEP space responsible for any breaches. So what am I saying here? For instance, within the mini-grid space and the EEP, what have we been able to do is, to ensure that, there are some very germane instruments, which the moderator earlier referred to, like the case in Rwanda, for instance, you spoke about the ESMP, that is Environmental and Social Management Plan, and of course, ESIA, the Environmental and Social Impact Assessment. These are instruments, at least which we try to enforce to ensure that all contractors or all mini-grid developers will provide us with such instruments. What is the importance of such instruments? The importance of such instruments is that, at least it has within it, it is, is embedded. I mean, EPR is embedded. Extended producer responsibility is embedded in such, in such instrument in the form of waste management plan. Now, having said that, for the SHS with the solar home system, which is actually, the system that we felt that will have, a whole lot of streams of e-waste, especially in terms, especially battery management. Again, with the enablement from the MD, we've been able to at least institutionalize, the provision of the PRO, right, producer responsibility of a certificate, producer responsibility organization, such that the producer responsibility organization or an MOU, from a recycler, in-house recycler in Nigeria, they will be the off-takers, of these e-waste, products, after the end of life. So by so doing, what it means in the true sense is that we created room for, whereby, for instance, the distributors, that is the SHS distributors, will formally register with the PRO, and also, allow the PRO to know the quantity of these materials that will come into the country, and possibly have a projection as to, what will be the end of, at what point will the end of life of this, equipment come into being. So by so doing, at least they will be in a position to at least furnish, the regulatory authorities with what is required in order to effectively manage such, byproduct. And then, beyond that, like I previously, in my previous comment, I did mention the fact that in Nigeria, for instance, you have quite high, volume of informal, operators in the space. So now the question would be if, really and truly to ensure that EPR becomes a standard bearer for whatever it is that we do, how possible would it be that we'll be in a position to actually, monitor the activities of these, informal operators? Now, the good thing here is that this is where I think, both the PRO and NESREA, including the Federal Ministry of Environment, should be in a position to at least, provide a guide in the sense, how to ensure that all these informal operators are made formal. It really doesn't matter how, these formal activities will take place, be it quasi, it doesn't really matter. The most important thing is to understand that at least, there are numbers of A, B, C, informants that are, that can be channeled, to formal activities. How would that happen? It can only happen where you have, good number of recycling companies, such that these previous informal recyclers, cannot be made or channeled to, direct their end of life e-waste to these recycling facilities. So that in itself will help them to upscale their activities. Vividly, when Chibukem was, making his own comment, he did mention the fact that, the government obviously will have to play a major role in the sense that, without the government, being the driver, it will be very difficult for, both the PRO, and the informal sector, to form a common ground. And moving forward, I think, it is also very important for government, to try as much as possible to get finance, from multilateral agencies and other donors, in order to invest in this sector, because it is very, very important. Because the EPR, as it is, has the potential to exclude, these informal operators who form a larger part of what is happening. But the good news is that, like I said previously, the good news is that, institutions such as the ROEA, at least a major driver in attempting to formalize EPR in the attempt, to ensure that all these, e-waste that are generated from solar or from solar-based industries are managed effectively. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Oko. Yeah, so EPR rule. So with due respect to end users, but manufacturers have got big responsibility, and this rule will enable now the government to hold manufacturers and distributors responsible if they breach e-waste management practice, and enforce such instruments such as environmental and social management plan. They should have it in place. So, and all the rules that are being made should have this, EPR concept on it. Thanks, Professor Oko. I think now let's get back to the comments and the question that I'm seeing in the chat box. I think we have one from Martin. Martin is saying, in fact, he's asking, what are the best practice when it comes to engaging with the informal waste pickers when developing more formal e-waste management systems? So who can respond to this?
Maybe Colin, I can respond to that quickly. Just sharing in the case of Nigeria. So in the informal sector are very critical, and you cannot overlook them because they constitute a lot of the recycling and management of e-waste. And in the case of Nigeria, is a bit, what has happened is the informal sector in Nigeria has an association that includes representatives of various recyclers across the country. So there has been efforts by the government, by government and donors to engage with this association and sensitize them basically on adopting more formal structure for recycling and trying to upskill their capacity towards more efficient ways of managing or safer ways of managing these batteries. So rather than the environmental regulator coming hard on them, and then which means that they will have to continue their practices behind the scene. There has been efforts towards bringing them closer and then trying to see how to upskill their capacity or make them a bit more formal, and get them to collaborate with more formal recyclers towards efficient e-waste management. So I would share that, but ultimately the best approach would be for an effective coordination mechanism that has the government, private sector, the PROs, the regulator, the REA, and these stakeholders together. That coordination mechanism would help towards both including the informal and formal sector, but then actually towards the efficient e-waste practice.
You're on mute, Colin.
You're mute, Colin. Okay. Colin, you're muted. If you can hear me, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm really very, very sorry. I was referring to what you were saying, that coordination is key to ensure that the informal sector is fully involved. I'm moving to the next question, and this also is from Martin again. And he said, has any of you speakers been involved in the refurbishment or repair to reduce the amount of e-waste in the environment? Any of you, the four of you? Probably Charles.
Can you please repeat the question again? I didn't get it clearly. Please, sorry.
Yeah. Let me. So Martin again is asking, have any of the speakers been involved in a project to set up repair and maintenance infrastructure so as to reduce the amount of usable but no longer desirable products becoming e-waste? So I think he's talking about refurbishment, yeah. So has any of you been involved at some capacity?
I can try to take that, maybe. This is Grayson. So maybe speaking from the experience of working with EEA for the past few years. When we started our operations, obviously repairs was not at the core of the business. But as you grow, your returns from the field increase, and over a period of 2 to 3 years, you start noticing a pileup. So ultimately, we were kind of forced to set up repair centers within our warehouses and our warehouse infrastructure. And while doing this, we quickly learned that number one, we shouldn't set up repair facilities earlier on as you start selling the product, because it just doesn't make business sense. But it makes real sense to invest more in incoming quality control in order to reduce the number of faulty products that actually go to the field in the first place. And then for the products that come back, repair has actually enabled us to reduce even the amount of money or expenditure or cost that we spend on warranty fulfillment. With our products, we provide about close to 4 years or 4 years of warranty to our customers, and whatever happens to the product within those 4 years, we repair it or we give the customer a brand new product. So currently the split that we are seeing in terms of how much we reuse from repairs is about 70-30%. So the 30% is split. With the 30% that's remaining is covered by new items that we have to procure from our suppliers in order to cover for warranty demand. So some of the other valuable lessons that we've learned in the process is Number one, if you can outsource or if you can find a partner to really work close with to regulate the cost of repair for your products, then do so. It's an opportunity, and it will relieve quite an investment in assets and infrastructure to actually repair your products, and have tight warranty agreements with your suppliers. Tight warranty agreements in a sense that you should be able to claim for products that have gotten damaged or broken within the warranty period from your suppliers. And then working closely with the government also helped. Back in the years when we were setting up our technical centers in Tanzania, we were working very closely with the Tanzania Bureau of Standards, to try and understand what standards do they use for testing the products as they come into the country, and how can we also adopt our repairs and testing mechanisms to match that standard. So to date, we still have regular collaborations with them. They bring some of their employees to come, get training and exposure on how we do our repairs and refurbishment. So these are just some of the lessons that we've learned in the process.
Thanks, Grayson. I hope Martin is satisfied with your responses. But otherwise, we have another question from Ethiopia. Biahilo I think this question is related to consumer protection as well. So he's saying one of the main reasons to have loss of e-waste in Ethiopia is importing low quality products. But if the government implements more controls to reduce the e-waste, the products will become more expensive. So how does this work? Is like wondering. So you control low quality products so as to control e-waste, but products become more expensive now. So how do we trade off? Any response? And in this case, I think we can even have responses from the audience, at large, not necessarily from the key speakers. Anyone volunteering?
Let me try to take that again.
Yeah.
So if I understand his question correctly, it's more a build-up to the question that Martin asked, and he wants to understand, like, what do we do to offset this cost, if at all there is a cost that increases as a result of companies importing products that add to the waste pile. So I think many companies have also taken sort of like a leap to sign agreements. For example, within the industry association, we have all the members of the industry association have signed basically an agreement to live up to the Consumer Protection Code. And part of this agreement requires that you advertise correctly the product that you bring into the country, that you do quality checks for your product and whatnot. So I think from the side of the government to regulate the quality of the products that is coming into the country is not something that is optional. It has to be mandatory, and whether by appointing companies like SGS, Intertech that do certificates of conformity and pre-verification of conformity to your products, that's mandatory. And one of the ways that you could use as well, actually quality assurance and incoming quality control and field quality control reduces the cost that you would incur in terms of your product, because then you learn your product and its performance earlier, and you're able to create mitigations that actually keep both you and your customers happy, and you won't have to spend that much money in the future to cover for failures that happen or functional failures that happen in the field. So I think that improving product quality is one side of the coin, and then learning, taking lessons from low quality products and improving on those is the other side. It shouldn't be considered.
Yeah, thanks, Grayson. I think it goes back to our famous rule of cost-benefit analysis, the totality, holistically, and I think that's where we are. We have to address both issues. We have to address US, but at the end of the day, there's an issue to protect the customers to get quality products as well. So we are running real out of time. In fact, we are supposed to be stopping here. But if you guys can allow me to have maybe 6-7 bonus minutes, that will be well appreciated. And if that's the case, then I have this question to you all, the key speakers, and before we wrap up, and of course on the audience at large. Let's zero into COVID. We know COVID will not be over in the coming days or in the coming few months. It should be there, and we know the pandemic has brought in restrictions, and and then we have people having on the government having no financial muscles again. We have seen development where the government are struggling to create policies for essential products during the pandemic to be allowed to continue. What do you think is the implication of this pandemic on e-waste? Does it provide some opportunity for sustainable future? And this is an open question to everybody. I hope I am clear enough.
So, sorry, Colin. So, just to clarify, are you asking what the impact of the pandemic? Sorry, I didn't quite get that. Are you trying to ask about the link between the pandemic and e-waste? Yeah. I mean, it's both coins. I mean, the consequences, but also the opportunity as far as e-waste is concerned.
Well, let me just attempt to add my just a view as to how the pandemic may have brought in some opportunities in relation to e-waste management. Well, definitely, as you agree with me, during the course of the pandemic, it has helped to a large extent to reduce what I would refer to as our glutinous want. And as a result of that, the environment itself has gained. If you recall, during the course of the pandemic, I mean, at the peak of the pandemic, in the UK, for instance, the level of activities and the e-waste that was generated within a couple of time, it went downhill. So to a large extent, it helped the environment. Then when you talk about the opportunity, and I think the opportunity is just for us, to understand truly that, we need, to. Hello. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. I think, please, can everyone mute?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I was saying.
Musoli, please.
Just to conclude, I was saying that I mean, moving forward, we need to understand that e-waste or environmental protection generally, the human race need to understand that the environment is the we that needs the environment, not the other way around. So we need to do everything possible to ensure that pandemic or no pandemic, we need to understand that it's high time for us to take care of our environment. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Oko. Any final thoughts on COVID as related to e-waste management before we wrap up?
Yeah, Colin, maybe I could add to what Professor
Not
Oko
more than 2 minutes, then we wrap up.
Yes. Okay, no problem. I mean, during the pandemic, we see, like, for example, the supply of waste, the waste streams, to the recyclers reducing a lot because of the reduced movement of goods and people being on lockdown and whatnot. And this has created a demand, for example, for lead batteries. The demand has increased, and thus the price or the LME index also increased a lot. And so we see recyclers, for those who could have access to materials, taking advantage of that and being able to kind of like make more money out of the lead recycling. But as well, on a negative side, there has been like a reduced collection of waste during this time. But on a positive side as well, there is reduced movement of, there's reduced sales, and with a drop in sales, it means companies are putting less and less waste into the market, and that's a good thing. So I think the pandemic has had both its opportunities and its consequences in terms of waste management, just in a nutshell. Thanks.
Thanks, Grayson. That's good. Guys, I think we have run out of time. It has been very, very good discussion. As we all strive to improve or promote or to attain universal access, the subject of e-waste management should not be forgotten. Should not be forgotten, not only from the environmental gain, but also it's a business case for us, even for the private sector who are involved in, the distribution of standalone solar system. With that, thanks a lot, everybody, and please enjoy your evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Colin.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a good rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, moderator.